The hospital never really slept. Even in the early morning when the city outside was still rubbing its eyes and streetlights flickered off one by one, the building hummed with a low, steady rhythm, monitors beeping, IV pumps clicking, the distant murmur of voices behind closed doors. For her, this was normal. This was home in a strange kind of way. Not the warm, cozy kind with family photos and Sunday dinners, but the kind where you knew every shortcut through the halls, where the coffee machine didn't spit out sludge before 6 a.m., and where silence could mean either peace or trouble. She adjusted the strap of her stethoscope and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her scrubs were plain, light blue, slightly faded from too many washes, but clean. Always clean. Her sneakers were worn but quiet, perfect for slipping in and out of rooms without startling anyone. She liked it that way. Being unseen didn't bother her. In fact, sometimes it helped. Patients opened up more when they thought no one was watching too closely. Today was her third day back after a short break. She'd spent it visiting her grandmother's old house, now empty, waiting to be sold, and sorting through boxes of photos, recipe cards, and old letters tied with ribbon. Among them was a small dog-eared notebook filled with hand-drawn signs: water, pain, thank you, I love you. Her grandmother had filled it years ago, teaching her granddaughter how to speak without sound. Words are powerful, she used to sign, eyes twinkling, but kindness doesn't need volume. Now, standing outside room 312, she took a slow breath. New patient, female, 82, admitted 2 nights ago after a fall at home. Hip surgery, successful, but recovery would be slow. She scanned the chart one last time. Margaret Whitmore. No known allergies. Mild hypertension. Lives alone. Son listed as emergency contact, Julian Whitmore. The name meant nothing to her. Just another name on paper. She knocked lightly, then pushed the door open. The room was neat, sunlight streaming through half-drawn blinds. The woman in the bed sat upright, hands folded in her lap, gaze fixed on the window. She looked composed, like someone used to being in charge even in a hospital gown. But there was something else, a tightness around her eyes, a slight frown, as if she were straining to hear something just beyond reach. "Good morning," the nurse said, stepping inside with a warm but calm voice. "I'm your nurse for today. How are you feeling?" The woman turned slowly. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, but confused. She gave a small nod, then glanced toward the door as if expecting someone else. The nurse repeated herself, a little louder this time, making sure to face her directly. "My name is Elena. I'll be taking care of you today." Still no response. Just that same polite nod. Then Elena noticed it. The hearing aids, nearly invisible behind her ears, and the way the woman's lips moved slightly, like she was trying to read them. But the nurse's mask covered half her face, making lip reading almost impossible. Ah, that explained it. She'd seen this before. Patients frustrated, embarrassed, even angry because no one took the time to communicate properly. Some staff would just raise their voices like that helped, or give up and write notes in messy handwriting. But she knew better. Without hesitation, she set her clipboard on the rolling tray table, pulled her mask down just enough to sign clearly, and raised her hands. "Hello," she signed, fingers forming the gentle curve of the greeting. "My name is Elena. I'm your nurse. How are you feeling today?" The change was immediate. The woman's eyes widened, then softened. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face, like a door opening after being locked for too long. She lifted her own hands, slower, more deliberate with age, but her signs were clear and practiced. "You sign." She signed back, her expression full of quiet wonder. Not many do. "My grandmother was deaf." Elena signed, her movements fluid, unhurried. "She taught me everything. I've been signing since I was little." Margaret's shoulders dropped as if a weight had been lifted. She leaned forward slightly, her earlier stiffness melting away. "Thank you," she signed. "I've been lost since I got here. Everyone talks so fast, or shouts." She made a small, wry gesture that clearly meant annoying. Elena smiled. "I won't shout, and I'll go slow." They talked for a few minutes about pain levels, about whether she'd eaten breakfast. She hadn't, the oatmeal looked like glue. About how her hip felt like someone parked a car on it. Margaret even signed a little joke about the green jello. Looks like something my cat would cough up. Elena laughed out loud, then quickly covered her mouth, remembering the mask. But Margaret just chuckled too, her eyes crinkling at the corners. It wasn't just communication. It was connection. Elena checked her vitals, blood pressure a little high but expected, and gently examined the surgical site. Everything looked clean, no redness or swelling. She adjusted the IV line, made sure the call button was within reach, and fluffed the pillows behind Margaret's back. "You're very kind," Margaret signed as Elena prepared to leave. "So are you," Elena replied. "I'll be back in a couple of hours. If you need anything, even just to talk, press the button. I'll come." Margaret nodded, then added almost shyly, "Will you sign with me again later?" "Of course." Elena signed without hesitation. "Every time I come in." She pulled her mask back up, gave a small wave, and stepped out into the hallway. What she didn't see, couldn't have seen, was the man standing just around the corner. He'd arrived 20 minutes earlier, coat still damp from the morning drizzle, briefcase in hand. He'd come straight from the airport, skipping his usual driver, taking a cab instead just to get here faster. He hated hospitals. The smell, the sounds, the helplessness. But his mother had fallen again, and this time it was serious. He'd been about to knock when the nurse entered. He paused, not wanting to interrupt. Then he heard, well, not heard but saw, his mother's hands move. He froze. His mother hadn't signed with anyone in months. Not since his father passed. She'd pulled away, stopped going to her deaf community events, even stopped answering video calls from old friends. Too tired, she'd say. But he knew it was grief, loneliness, the kind that doesn't make noise but eats you from the inside. And now, here she was, smiling, really smiling. Her hands dancing in the air like they used to when he was a boy, telling him stories at the dinner table while his father laughed and poured more wine. He watched through the narrow window in the door as the nurse, Elena, moved with calm confidence. Not rushed, not performing, just present. She didn't look at her watch once, didn't glance at her phone. She just focused on his mother, on the conversation happening in silence. When Elena stepped out, he ducked back instinctively, pressing himself against the wall near the supply closet. He didn't want to be seen, not yet. He needed a moment to process. She walked past without noticing him, head slightly down, already reviewing her next task in her mind. She looked tired but not broken. There was a quiet strength in the way she carried herself, like she'd learned long ago that the world doesn't always reward loudness, but it always needs kindness. He waited until her footsteps faded down the hall before stepping toward his mother's door. He took a deep breath, smoothed his coat, and knocked softly. "Mom, it's me." Margaret turned, her face lighting up again, but differently this time. Happy to see him, yes, but the spark from earlier was softer now, more reserved. He walked in, kissed her forehead, and sat in the chair by the bed. "How are you really?" he asked, keeping his voice low and clear. She signed slowly. "Better." A good nurse came. "She signs." He nodded. "I saw her." Margaret studied his face. "You watched." He didn't deny it. "I've never seen you look so relaxed here." She looked down at her hands, then back at him. "She didn't treat me like a problem, like something broken that needs fixing. She just talked to me." He swallowed hard, because he knew, really knew what that meant. How many times had he hired the best home aides, the most expensive specialists, only for his mother to say, "They don't see me. They see the deaf old lady." He'd thrown money at the problem, thinking it would help. But what she needed wasn't a bigger budget. It was someone who spoke her language, literally. "Do you know her name?" he asked. "Elena." Margaret signed. She said her grandmother taught her. He repeated the name quietly, like testing how it felt on his tongue. Elena. Back in the nurse's station, Elena was updating charts when her coworker leaned over. "Hey, did you hear? Room 3 and 12? That's Julian Whitmore's mom." Elena blinked. "Who? The CEO of Viridian? Tech guy? Billionaire?" His face was on Forbes last month. Elena just shrugged. Oh, okay, it didn't mean anything to her. She'd never followed business news. To her, room 312 was just Margaret, a woman who liked daisies, hated hospital food, and missed her garden. But later, as she prepped medications for the afternoon, she caught herself wondering, did he know his mother signed? Did he ever try to learn? She shook her head. Not her business. Her job was to care for the patient in front of her, not worry about who their son was or how much money he had. Still, as she walked back toward room 312 with a fresh cup of herbal tea, chamomile, Margaret's favorite, smuggled from home in a thermos, she felt a strange flutter in her chest. Not nerves, more like hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, someone important had finally seen his mother for who she really was. And maybe, just maybe, that someone would stick around long enough to learn how to say, "I love you," in a language. He didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. At first, she didn't think much of it. Family members came and went all the time. Some stayed for hours, others dropped by for 5 minutes between meetings, barely making eye contact before rushing off again. She'd seen it enough to know that presence didn't always mean care, and absence didn't always mean neglect. Life was messy. People had jobs, kids, emergencies, but Margaret noticed. On the third morning, as Elena helped her sit up for breakfast, Margaret's hands moved slowly, almost reluctantly. "He hasn't called," and she signed. "Not even a text." Elena paused, spoon hovering over the oatmeal she'd convinced the kitchen to make with extra cinnamon. "Your son?" Margaret nodded, looking out the window again. The same distant gaze from their first meeting had returned, but now it carried a quiet disappointment. "He's always busy. Important things. Big decisions." She made a small, dismissive flick with her wrist, the sign for money mixed with too much. Elena didn't say anything. She just stirred the oatmeal gently and handed her the spoon. But inside, something tightened. Not anger, more like sadness, because she'd seen the way Margaret's face had lit up when they talked about her garden, or how she kept a photo of her late husband tucked in the book on her nightstand. This woman wasn't just a patient. She was someone's mother, someone who deserved more than silence. Later that afternoon, while restocking bandages in the supply closet, one of the senior nurses pulled her aside. "Hey," she said, lowering her voice, "just so you know, Whitmore's been calling the front desk every hour, asking about his mom's vitals, pain levels, whether she's eating. He even asked if you're still assigned to her." Elena blinked. "He did?" "Yeah, sounds stressed. Like really stressed. I told him everything's stable, but he keeps calling." That night, during her rounds, Elena found Margaret awake long past her usual bedtime, staring at her phone screen. The glow lit up her face in the dark room. "He sent a message." Margaret signed without looking up. "Said he's stuck in Tokyo, flight delayed. Meetings all week." She sighed, the kind that came from deep in the chest. "He always has meetings." Elena sat on the edge of the chair. "Do you want to call him?" "I can help set up a video call. The hospital Wi-Fi's slow, but it works." Margaret hesitated, then shook her head. "What would we talk about?" "He doesn't know how to sign anymore." "Not really. He used to when he was little. But after his father..." He stopped. She didn't need to say more. Elena understood. Grief did that. Shut doors you didn't even know were open. What neither of them knew was that he hadn't gone to Tokyo. He'd canceled the trip the moment his mother was admitted. Instead, he'd been staying in a quiet hotel 3 blocks from the hospital, working remotely, taking calls in hushed tones, and walking past St. Clair's every evening, just to see if her light was still on. He couldn't bring himself to go inside. Not after seeing how easily his mother connected with Elena. Not after realizing how much he'd let slip away. He remembered learning signs as a boy. Milk, cookie, I love you, sitting on the kitchen floor while his mother laughed and corrected his clumsy fingers. But after his father died suddenly of a heart attack 5 years ago, everything changed. His mother withdrew. He threw himself into work, building an empire out of code and ambition, thinking success would somehow fill the silence at home. It didn't. Now, watching from across the street one rainy evening, he saw Elena step out for a quick break. She stood under the awning, arms crossed against the chill, sipping coffee from a paper cup. She looked tired but peaceful. Not the kind of peace that came from doing nothing, but from doing something that mattered. He almost walked over. Almost said thank you, but he stopped himself. What would he even say? Thanks for being the kind of person my mother deserves, but I'm not. Instead, he went back to his hotel room and opened his laptop. He typed 2 words into the search bar. Learn ASL. The next morning, Elena walked into room 312 to find Margaret holding a small notebook. "Look," she signed, eyes bright. "He sent this." Elena took the notebook. On the first page, in careful, uneven handwriting, was a list. "Hello, so. Thank you." Mars, hand to chest, then out. Mom, thumb to chin. Tap twice. I'm sorry. Fist over heart. Twist gently below it, a note in pen. "Practicing. We'll be better soon. Love you." Elena's throat tightened. She handed it back. "He's trying," she signed. Margaret nodded, but her smile was bittersweet. Trying is good, but showing up is better. That same afternoon he finally came, not in a suit. Not with an entourage. Just a man in a dark sweater and jeans carrying a paper bag that smelled faintly of fresh bread. He knocked softly, then stepped inside when Margaret waved him in. Elena was there, changing the IV bag. She nodded politely and kept working, giving them space. He sat beside the bed, opened the bag, and pulled out a still warm loaf of sourdough, his mother's favorite from the bakery near their old house. "Remember?" He signed. His movements were stiff, unsure, but deliberate. Margaret's eyes filled. She reached out and touched his hand. "You remembered." They didn't talk much after that. Just sat in comfortable silence, sharing bread, the way they used to on Sunday mornings when he was a boy. But Elena noticed something. He kept glancing at her. Not in a strange way, more like he was watching how she moved. How she signed when she asked Margaret if she needed water. How she adjusted the blanket without making a fuss. Later, as she was leaving the room, he stood up. "Can I ask you something?" She turned. "Of course." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "How long have you been signing?" "Since I was 5. My grandmother was deaf. She raised me after my parents." She trailed off, not wanting to go into it. He nodded. "You're really good at it. Not just the signs. The way you listen with your eyes." She smiled faintly. "It's not about being good. It's about caring enough to try." He looked down at his hands. "I used to try." "You can start again," she said gently. He met her gaze. "I want to." Over the next few days, he came every evening. Sometimes he stayed for 20 minutes. Sometimes an hour. He brought books, photos, even a small potted daisy for the windowsill. "From your garden," he told his mother. And slowly, his signs improved. He practiced during breaks, repeating words under his breath. He asked Elena quiet questions when his mother was napping. "How do you sign proud? What's the sign for I missed you?" She showed him without judgment. Never made him feel foolish for forgetting. One night after Margaret had fallen asleep, they stood together in the hallway. "I hired interpreters for years," he admitted, voice low. "The best in the city. But she never liked them. Said they talked at her, not with her." Elena nodded. "It's not about fluency. It's about heart." He looked at her then, not as a nurse, not as an employee, but as someone who understood something he'd spent years ignoring. "You saw her. Really saw her. From the first minute. I just greeted her in her language," she said simply. "But no one else did. She didn't know what to say to that. So she just said she loves you. She's just tired of waiting for you to remember how to speak to her." He swallowed hard. "I'm learning." "I know," she said. And she sees it. The turning point came on the 6th day. Margaret was struggling with physical therapy, frustrated, in pain, ready to give up. The therapist had left, shaking her head. Elena found her crying silently, tears rolling down her cheeks, hands clenched in the sheets. "I can't do it," she signed brokenly. "I'm too old, too weak." Elena sat beside her. "You're not weak. You're healing." Just then he walked in. He saw his mother's tears, saw Elena's hand resting gently on hers, and something in his expression shifted. Without a word, he knelt beside the bed. "Mom," he signed, clearer now, smoother. "Remember when I fell off my bike at 7? Broke my arm. You stayed up all night holding ice on it, signing stories until I fell asleep." Margaret looked at him, surprised. "You never gave up on me," he continued. "Let me do the same for you." Then slowly he signed 3 words Elena had only ever seen in movies or heard in whispered memories. "I love you." Not the rushed, automatic kind, but the full, proper sign, hand-shaped like a heart, pulled from chest outward, held in the air like an offering. Margaret reached out and pulled him into a hug. Elena quietly stepped out and closed the door behind her. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. Her eyes stung, but she smiled because sometimes healing didn't come from medicine or surgery. Sometimes it came from a son remembering how to say "I love you" in his mother's language. And maybe, just maybe, from a quiet nurse who reminded him that love isn't measured in boardrooms or bank accounts, but in the courage to show up, hands open, heart ready to learn. The change started small, like the way sunlight creeps across a room, unnoticed at first until suddenly everything's warm. Margaret began sitting up straighter during meals. She joked with the physical therapist. She even asked for her hair to be brushed and pinned back, something she hadn't cared about since admission. And every evening, without fail, her son came. Not for 5 minutes, not just to check a box. He stayed, he signed, he listened. Elena saw it all from the edges of the room, doing her rounds, taking vitals, refilling water pitcher. How she didn't interfere, didn't insert herself. She just made sure the space stayed safe for healing, for reconnection, for quiet repair. But then, on the morning of Margaret's 8th day in the hospital, everything shifted. Elena was halfway through her shift report when the unit manager called her into the office. The door clicked shut behind her, and the air suddenly felt too still. "Have a seat," the manager said, smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes. She smoothed her blouse, cleared her throat. "So we've had some developments regarding room 312. Elena sat, hands folded in her lap. "Is everything okay with Mrs. Whitmore?" "Oh, yes. More than okay." The manager leaned forward, voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "Turns out her son is Julian Whitmore. You know, the Viridian guy? Tech billionaire? Owns half the apps on your phone?" Elena blinked. I knew his name was listed, but I didn't realize." "Nobody did," the manager interrupted, waving a hand. "He's famously private. But now that he's been coming daily, well, corporate relations got involved. Hospital administration is very interested in keeping him happy." Elena frowned slightly. "He seems happy. His mom's doing well." "That's not the point," the manager said, tapping a manicured nail on the desk. "The point is we've been asked to provide elevated care, private suite upgrade already arranged, personal chef meals approved." And as she paused, watching Elena carefully, "They've requested a more experienced primary nurse." Elena's stomach dropped. "You're reassigning me?" "It's not personal," the manager said quickly. "It's protocol. High-profile patients get senior staff. You're still early in your career. They want someone with, more polish." Elena stared at her hands. She thought of Margaret's relieved smile that first morning. The way she'd signed, "You're kind." The notebook with the shaky ASL notes. "The daisy on the windowsill. It is personal," she said quietly. "She trusts me. We communicate." In her language, the manager sighed. "Look, I get it. You've done a great job, but this isn't just about nursing anymore. It's about optics, reputation. If Mr. Whitmore decides to donate to the hospital, which he very well might, we need to show we treat VIPs with the utmost respect." Elena stood up. Respect isn't about fancy titles or years on a resume. It's about seeing someone as a person, not a VIP. The manager's smile tightened. "Be that as it may, the decision's been made. You'll be reassigned to the East Wing starting tomorrow. Room 312 will be handled by Linda Chen. She's been here 15 years, fluent in 3 languages, former ICU lead." Elena didn't argue. She just nodded, turned, and walked out, but her chest felt hollow. She didn't go straight back to the floor. Instead, she stepped outside, into the small courtyard behind the hospital where staff sometimes ate lunch. The air was cool, the sky overcast. She sat on a bench staring at the patchy grass, trying to steady her breathing. She wasn't angry. Not really. She understood how the world worked. Money opened doors, names carried weight, and hospitals, like every other institution, played the game. But it hurt, because this wasn't about status. It was about connection. And now, just as Margaret was starting to heal, not just her hip, but her heart, they were pulling the one person who spoke her language away. "Elena?" She looked up. He stood a few feet away, hands in his coat pockets, looking uncharacteristically unsure. He must have seen her leave the office. "Can I sit?" he asked. She nodded. He sat beside her, not too close. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he said, "I heard what they're planning to do." She kept her eyes on the ground. "Then you know." I told them no. She turned to him, surprised. "I went straight to the administrator," he said, voice low but firm. "I told them if they reassign you, I pull my mother out of this hospital today. And I make sure every news outlet knows why." Elena's breath caught. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "You didn't just care for her. You gave her back her voice. Her dignity. That's not something you replace with more experience." She swallowed. "I'm just a nurse." "You're the reason she's smiling again," he said. "That's not just anything." A silence settled between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was honest. After a while he said, "They're scared of me, because of who I am. But you never cared." "I cared about your mom," she corrected gently. He smiled faintly. "Same thing lately." She looked at him then, not as the CEO, not as the billionaire, but as a man who'd spent years building walls and was only now learning how to take them down, one sign at a time. "I don't want special treatment," she said. "I just want to do my job." "You are," he said. "Better than anyone else could." Back on the unit, the tension was thick. The manager avoided her eyes. Linda Chen gave her a tight professional nod but said nothing. The staff whispered in corners. But when Elena walked into room 312 that afternoon, Margaret looked up and signed immediately. "They tried to take you away." Elena nodded. "They did. He stopped them." "He did." Margaret studied her face. "You're upset." "A little," Elena admitted. "Not at you, at the way things work." Margaret reached out and took her hand. Her grip was stronger now. "The world is loud, but you chose to speak softly, in my language. That matters more than money, more than titles." Elena squeezed her hand back. "Thank you." Later that evening, as she was charting at the nurse's station, he appeared again. This time he didn't hover. He walked right up. "I'd like to take you to dinner," he said. She looked up, startled. "Dinner?" "Not as Julian Whitmore, CEO," he said quickly, as if reading her mind. "Just as the son who's grateful, and maybe, as someone who wants to understand how you knew from the very first minute, how to reach her when I couldn't." She hesitated. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because..." She searched for the right words. "This isn't about me. It's about your mom. And I don't want anyone thinking I'm trying to get something." He nodded slowly. "I get that. But what if I'm the one asking? Not for business, not for favors, just to say thank you properly. Over a meal. No cameras. No reporters. Just two people who care about the same woman." She looked down at her pen. She thought of her grandmother's words. "Kindness doesn't need volume, but it deserves to be seen." Finally, she said, "One dinner. As thanks, that's all." He smiled. Not the polished boardroom smile she'd seen in photos, but a real one, tired and hopeful. "That's all I'm asking." The next night, after her shift ended, she met him outside the hospital. He wasn't in a luxury car, just a plain black sedan, driver waiting patiently. "You didn't have to pick me up," she said as he opened the door for her. "I wanted to," he said. They drove across town, not to some fancy rooftop restaurant, but to a small, family-run Italian place tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. Warm light spilled from the windows. The smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the air the moment they stepped inside. "This was my parents' favorite," he said quietly as they were led to a corner table. "They came here every anniversary." She looked around. Red checkered tablecloths. Photos of Italy on the walls. An old man playing piano in the corner. It felt human. They ordered simple food, pasta, salad, bread, no wine. He didn't want anything that might blur the conversation. For a while, they just ate in comfortable silence. Then he said, "How did you learn to sign so well?" She told him about her grandmother, how she'd raised her after her parents died in a car crash when she was 6, how their house was always quiet but never lonely, how signing wasn't just communication, it was love made visible. He listened, really listened, not checking his phone, not glancing at the door, just her words, her hands, her eyes. Then he told her about his father, how he'd been the loud one, the storyteller, the one who filled every room with laughter. How after he died, the house felt like a museum. How he'd buried himself in work because silence was too heavy to carry alone. And my mom, he paused, fingers tracing the rim of his water glass. I thought if I gave her the best of everything, maids, drivers, the finest doctors, she'd be okay. But I forgot the one thing she needed most. Me, in her world. Not mine, Elena nodded. You can't outsource love. He looked up, surprised. Exactly, they talked for hours. Not about money. Not about companies or headlines. About books they liked. About the first time they felt truly seen. About how hard it is to be gentle in a world that rewards sharp edges. When he dropped her off back at the hospital parking lot, he didn't try to kiss her or ask for her number. He just said, "Thank you for tonight." She smiled. "Thank you for listening." As she walked toward the staff entrance, she realized something. She hadn't once thought of him as a millionaire. She'd just seen a man trying to become the son his mother deserved. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Dinner hadn't changed everything, but it had changed something. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something quieter, deeper, understanding. Two people who'd spent years speaking different languages, literally and otherwise, had finally found a way to listen. Back at the hospital, things settled into a new rhythm. Elena still cared for Margaret, but now there was a softness in the air, a kind of unspoken trust that stretched beyond the patient-nurse line. And he kept coming, not just as a dutiful son, but as someone learning slowly how to be present. One afternoon, while Margaret napped, he lingered in the hallway after visiting hours. Helena was restocking linens nearby. "I've been taking lessons," he said, almost shyly. She turned. "ASL?" He nodded. "Twice a week, online, with a teacher from the Deaf Community Center." He hesitated. "It's harder than I remembered." "You're doing better," she said honestly. "Your signs are clearer." Less stiff, he smiled. "I practiced the sign for proud last night. Over and over. Why that one? Because I want to tell her I'm proud of her. For fighting through this. For not giving up on me even when I disappeared into work." Elena looked at him. Really looked. The polished CEO was still there, sure, but beneath it was something raw, something tender. A man trying to stitch his life back together one sign at a time. "She already knows," Elena said softly. "But she'll love hearing you say it." A few days later, Margaret was cleared for discharge. Physical therapy would continue at home, but she was strong enough to leave. The hospital staff buzzed with quiet excitement. Another success story. But for Elena, it felt bittersweet. She helped pack Margaret's few belongings, the daisy plant now blooming, the notebook filled with her son's practice signs, the photo of her late husband. "I'll miss you." Margaret signed as Elena zipped up the small suitcase. "I'll miss you too," Elena replied. "But I'll come visit, if that's okay." Margaret's eyes lit up. "You'd do that?" "Of course." Just then he walked in, holding a lightweight walker with a custom cushion. Ordered special, ergonomic, in Margaret's favorite shade of lavender. "All set?" he asked. Margaret nodded, then signed to Elena. "He's been nervous all morning. Didn't want you to think he was just taking me away." Elena smiled. "I don't think that." He looked at her, a question in his eyes. She stepped closer. "Take good care of her." "I will," he said, "but I was wondering, would you consider coming to her birthday party? Next month. She's turning 80. Elena blinked. "Me?" "She asked for you," he said simply. "Said you're part of her healing." She didn't know what to say. Nurses didn't usually get invited to patients' family celebrations. It crossed lines. But this didn't feel like crossing. It felt like connection. "I'd be honored," she said. The weeks after Margaret left were quieter. Elena threw herself into her shifts, helped train new nurses, even started a small initiative to get more ASL resources in the unit. But sometimes during her breaks, she'd catch herself thinking about the daisy on the windowsill, or the way Margaret laughed when she made a joke about hospital pudding. Then, one rainy Tuesday, he showed up again, not in the patient wing, not with flowers or updates. He waited outside the staff entrance after her shift, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "Mind if I walk with you?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. They walked in silence for a block, steam rising from the cups, rain tapping softly on their jackets. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about what you said that night about not outsourcing love." She glanced at him. Yeah? I realized I've been doing the same thing with gratitude. She frowned. How? I wanted to thank you, he said. So I thought about writing a big check to the hospital. Naming a wing after you. Something grand. He shook his head. But that's not you. You don't want monuments. You want meaning. She stopped walking. What are you saying? He turned to face her. I asked around. Found out the hospital has almost no staff trained in ASL. Most deaf or hard of hearing patients rely on video interpreters or family members. It's not enough. Her eyes widened. You're thinking of funding a program? I'm thinking of funding your program, he said. You mentioned it once about training nurses in basic ASL, creating visual communication kits, maybe even hiring a part-time on-site interpreter. I looked into it. It's doable, and it's needed. She stared at him, stunned. You remembered that? I remember everything you say, he admitted quietly. Her throat tightened. This wasn't charity. It wasn't a flashy donation to boost his image. It was listening, really listening and acting on what he heard, but I can't run it alone, she said. I'm just one nurse. You won't be alone, he said. I'll handle the funding, the logistics, but you'll lead it. Design the curriculum. Train the team. You know what matters. She looked down at her coffee, steam curling into the damp air. This was everything she'd dreamed of, making the hospital more welcoming, more human for patients like Margaret. For patients like her grandmother. Finally, she nodded. Okay, but only if it's done right. No shortcuts, no PR stunts, no stunts, he promised. Just care. The project moved faster than she expected. Within weeks, a small grant was approved. A meeting room was converted into a training space. Flyers went up. And Elena, quiet, unassuming Elena, found herself standing in front of a group of curious nurses, teaching them how to sign the pain, water, I'm here for you. He came to the first session, not to observe, but to participate, sat in the back, notebook open, practicing along with everyone else. When someone asked why the CEO was there, he just said, because I'm learning too. Afterward, as they walked out together, she said, you didn't have to sit through that. Yes, I did, he said. I need to be as fluent as you are. For her, and... He paused. For me, she looked at him. For you? I spent so long building a world where words were code, deals, strategies, he said. But real communication, the kind that heals, it's slower, softer. It happens in the hands, in the eyes. You showed me that. She didn't reply right away. Rain had started again, light and steady. They stood under the awning of a closed bookstore, shoulders almost touching. You're not the person the news says you are, she said finally. He smiled faintly. I'm not sure who that person is anymore, but I'm trying to be someone better. One evening, after a long training session, he asked if she'd like to grab dinner again. This time, she said yes without hesitation. They went back to the same Italian place, the same corner table, but everything felt different. Lighter, like they weren't carrying secrets or roles anymore. Over steaming plates of pasta, he signed something slowly, carefully. You see me, he signed. Not the money. Not the title, just me. She watched his hands, the same hands that signed boardroom deals now forming signs of vulnerability. Because you let me, she signed back. He held her gaze. I've spent my life being seen for what I have. You're the first person who sees me for what I'm trying to become. She didn't look away. We're all becoming something. Every day. They talked late into the night. Not about work, not about the past, but about the future. About the ASL program. About how healing isn't just physical. About how sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show up, hands open, heart ready. When he walked her to her car, he didn't reach for her hand, didn't try to kiss her. He just signed one more thing before she got in. Thank you for seeing us. She smiled. Thank you for letting me. As she drove home, rain streaking the windshield, she realized something. This wasn't a fairy tale. There were no grand declarations, no sudden riches, no perfect endings, but there was something better. There was realness. There was a man learning to speak his mother's language. There was a nurse finding her voice in a system that often silenced it, and between them a quiet, growing understanding that kindness, when given freely, doesn't just change one life, it ripples, and sometimes, if you're lucky, it comes back to you, not as reward, but as connection, as hope. as the simple, profound act of being truly seen. The morning of Margaret's 80th birthday dawned clear and golden, the kind of autumn day that feels like a gift. Leaves crunched underfoot, the air carried the scent of wood smoke and apples, and the city seemed to slow down just enough to let joy breathe. Elena stood in front of her closet for longer than usual, not because she didn't know what to wear, but because this wasn't just another visit. This was a celebration, a homecoming of sorts. She chose a soft sweater the color of sage, dark slacks, and the simple silver locket her grandmother had given her, the one she only wore on days that mattered. She'd been to the house once before, weeks earlier, to help set up the ASL training materials for the hospital program. It was a quiet, elegant place, not flashy but full of warmth. Bookshelves lined the walls, photos of Margaret and her late husband covered the mantel, and in the sunroom a dozen daisies bloomed in clay pots, all grown from the single plant that had sat on the hospital windowsill. When she arrived, the driveway was already lined with cars, not luxury sedans or chauffeured SUVs, but ordinary vehicles. Neighbors, old friends from the deaf community center, Margaret's longtime book club members. There were no reporters, no security, no signs of the wealth that usually followed him. Just people who loved her. He met her at the door before she could even knock. "You came," he said, and the relief in his voice surprised her. "Of course I came," she replied. "She asked me to." He stepped aside and the sound, or rather the beautiful silence of the house washed over her. Inside, people moved with ease, hands flying in conversation, laughter bubbling up in signed exclamations and warm hugs. A string quartet played softly in the corner, not for show, but because Margaret had always loved live music, even if she couldn't hear it the way others did. She felt it in her chest, she'd once signed. Vibrations are their own kind of song. Margaret sat in her favorite armchair near the fireplace, dressed in a deep blue dress with pearl buttons, her hair neatly pinned. When she saw Elena, her face lit up like sunrise. "You're here," she signed, standing slowly with the help of her lavender walker. Elena hurried over. "Happy birthday," she signed back, then handed her a small wrapped box. Margaret opened it carefully. Inside was a handmade photo album, filled with pictures from her hospital stay. Elena had taken them discreetly. Margaret smiling at the daisy, signing a joke to the physical therapist, holding her son's hand during a quiet moment. On the last page, a note in neat handwriting. "You were never alone." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. She pulled Elena into a hug, then signed, "This is the best gift I've ever received." The party unfolded like a gentle tide. No speeches, no forced applause, just connection. People signed, spoke, wrote notes, used gestures. Some guests were deaf, some hearing, some hard of hearing. No one was left out. The food was simple but abundant. Lasagna, garlic bread, roasted vegetables, and a towering cake decorated with sugar daisies. He stayed close to his mother all afternoon, not hovering, but present. He signed with old family friends, helped serve coffee, even danced awkwardly but earnestly, with Margaret in the living room to a song only she could feel through the floorboards. Elena watched from the edge of the room, sipping apple cider, heart full in a way she couldn't name. Later, as the sun dipped low and guests began to leave, he found her on the back porch. "You look like you're thinking," he said, handing her a fresh cup of cider. "I'm just taking it in," she said. "This feels real. Like the kind of life people dream of but rarely get to live." He leaned against the railing, looking out at the garden, Margaret's pride and joy, now thriving again after months of neglect. "I used to think success meant never needing anyone," he said quietly. "That if I built something big enough, I'd be safe. But safety isn't in buildings or bank accounts. It's in moments like this. In being known," she nodded. "Your mom created that. Even when she was hurting, she held space for love. She had help," he said, glancing at her. "From you." "I just greeted her in her language," Elena said, echoing her own words from weeks ago. "And that changed everything," he said. A comfortable silence settled between them. Crickets began to sing. Fireflies blinked in the garden. Then he turned to her, hands moving slowly, deliberately. "I've been practicing something new," he signed. She watched. His signs were careful, full of intention. "You showed me that love isn't loud. It's patient. It's showing up." It's learning someone's language even when it's hard. You didn't just care for my mother. You reminded me how to be human. He paused, then added softer. I don't want to lose that. Or you. Her breath caught. Not because of the words, but because of the honesty behind them. No grand promises. No pressure. Just truth. I'm not going anywhere, she signed back. Not from the program. Not from her and not from this. He smiled, a real, unguarded smile. Good. In the weeks that followed, life didn't transform overnight. There were no sudden weddings, no dramatic twists. But something deeper took root. The ASL program at the hospital grew. More nurses signed up. Patients reported feeling safer, more respected. Elena became its coordinator, not because of who she knew, but because of who she was, patient, skilled, and deeply human. He supported it quietly, never taking credit, never turning it into a publicity stunt. He still came to the hospital sometimes, not to visit, but to learn. He'd sit in on training sessions, practice signs with new staff, even help design visual communication cards for non-signing patients. And slowly, without fanfare, he and Elena began spending more time together. Not dates in the traditional sense, but shared moments. Coffee after a long shift, walks in the park, helping Margaret plant new daisies in the spring. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset, Margaret signed to Elena, "He's different now, lighter." "He's home," Elena signed back. Margaret nodded. "And you brought him back?" "No," Elena said gently. "He chose to come back. I just held the door open." Months later, on a quiet Tuesday, Elena walked into room 312 again, not as a nurse, but as a friend. Margaret had been readmitted for a minor procedure, nothing serious. But the moment Elena stepped inside, the old rhythm returned. "You're still the best nurse," as Margaret signed with a wink. "I'm not your nurse anymore," Elena reminded her, smiling. "You'll always be," Margaret replied. Some bonds don't need titles. Later that night, as Elena left the hospital, he was waiting by her car. "How is she?" he asked. "Good. Tired, but good," he nodded. Then, without a word, he signed something he'd practiced for weeks. Something his grandmother used to sign to him as a child. Something he hadn't used in decades. "You're enough." Elena's eyes filled. Because those 3 words held everything. The apology for his absence, the gratitude for her presence, the promise of a future built on realness, not reputation. "So are you," she signed back. They didn't say more. They didn't need to. As she drove home, she thought about that first morning in room 312, how she'd simply greeted a woman in her language, never knowing it would unravel a lifetime of silence between a mother and son, never knowing it would lead her here, to a life where kindness wasn't small but central, where being seen for who you truly are was the greatest gift of all. And in the rearview mirror, the hospital lights glowed softly against the night sky, not as a place of sickness, but as a place where healing began with a single sign, a single act of courage, a single choice to say, "I see you." And sometimes that was all it took to change everything.